In GraphQL, we have this concept of instrumentation. And what instrumentation does is it allows you, gives you the capability to basically look at the GraphQL query coming in, and when it's executing within the server, you can provide a small piece of code that's going to be executed at various different stages throughout the execution of that query. For an example, whenever you submit a query in, you can provide instrumentation that will log a request at the start of execution. Whenever you begin a parse, whenever you begin validation, when you execute the operation, and this goes on. And a common one would be whenever you fetch a field or you want to track the latency or the time taken between when the field resolver executes and completes. So instrumentation allows us to add code to all the different execution steps of the GraphQL query, and it's great for logging. Now we have this simple instrumentation in GraphQL Spring Boot, which will allow us to have a no-op operation on each of these steps, and allows us to just override the one we want. So in this example, I'm going to create a request logging class. So we say request logging instrumentation. And in here, what we want to do is we want to extend that simple instrumentation, and let's add our common methods. So we want to make it a component so it's picked up as a Spring Bean. And here we set the required arc constructor, and we're going to use the timings. So I need an instance of the clock, and we want to override one method, and that's going to be the beginExecution. So let's go ahead and steal that. And we don't want to return the SimpleInstrumentation as empty. What we want to do is use the whenCompleted callback. So what this SimpleInstrumentation does is it allows us to provide two different callback functions, or two different consumers. One is when the code is dispatched, and one is when it's complete. So whenever the beginExecution actually occurs, we return this context that returns two callbacks, perform this before it actually begins, and perform this after it begins. So in our instance, we're just interested in the after, because we can use the before as here, so let's not worry about that. So we say when completed, and in here we have the execution result and the throwable. So this is used by GraphQL to contain the data, the errors, and it allows you to transform the Java object on the response via the GraphQL specification to the GraphQL actual JSON output, which will go over the wire. So in here we have our callback function, but what we want to do is first log some stuff. So we say the start time, so we say instant.now, pass in that clock. So now we have the start time, and let's go ahead and actually log the request. So I can say execution ID as parameters dot get execution input dot get execution ID. So that's a unique ID for the request. I can say execution ID. So we say execution ID, and then we say query with variables. So now we get the query. So we say parameters dot get query, parameters dot get variables. So now we've logged the request, and in here let's go ahead and say if throwable is null, then we have successfully completed. So we can say log.info, again execution ID, say completed successfully in, and then we need the time. else in now. And then we have a nice else. And we log a warning if it failed. Execution ID failed in time, so execution ID duration, and print the throwable. So let's go ahead and start the server. So what we're doing here is when we first begin execution of the query, we're going to log the start time. We then log the full query, and then whenever it completes and begin execution completes, this will occur at the very end of the query. So when everything's finished, then we can log if it's completed successfully or failed. So let's execute the query. So we have dfd plus the bank account query. So here you can see that we have the unique ID of the query. Here we have the dfd ID and the bank account query logged. And then in here you can see the resolvers then executed. And then we say it completed successfully in 0.06. So yeah, pretty nice. So let me play a few more in. And as you can see here, it continues, and again we're getting responses in 5 milliseconds for the login. Now this instrumentation can be used for various different things. If you want to track how fields are being used or how fields are executed, then that's good. And in the following tutorial I will show you how you can trace your API to see how long things are taking. Now in GraphQL, maybe a little bit of advanced topic here, but when you instrument your API, if one of the resolvers throws an exception, well then the following resolver that's dependent on it will not execute. Therefore, if you're just relying on executed instrumentation then to see which queries your client supplies, well that can be lead to false data if one of the prerequisite resolvers is throwing exceptions. Obviously because it's blocking the following one to execute, which would then block the instrumentation. Therefore you would think that it's not called when it may just be getting called. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and I will see you in the next episode where I go over the tracing instrumentation for your whole GraphQL API. Thank you very much and have a great day.